In this video, I'd like to explain to you the RESE NESE MoRMoN system. This is a framework for you to remember all the endings of German articles and adjectives and also pronouns. So it's pretty cool actually, because for most students, the endings in all the different cases and genders are very confusing. And with this system, it's much easier to remember them. So how does it work? We make a table. On the horizontal axis, we put the genders. We start with masculine. Grammar is usually a bit chauvinist. Then we put the feminine, then the neutral, and then the plural. And on the horizontal axis, we put the cases. We start with the most important one, nominative, then we go to accusative, then dative, and at the end we have the least important one, which is genitive. And then we fill in the table with the words that actually make up the RESE NESE MoRMoN system. So we put RESE, and then we put NESE, and then we put MoRMoN. The O is actually just to vocalize, so the real word is MoRMoN, but since this is difficult to pronounce, I put this O in between, so it's a little bit easier to memorize. And then sera for genitive. Okay, again, the E and A is just for vocalizing. The real word is sr, but since this is difficult to pronounce, I put a vowel in between. Okay, so this is RESE NESE MoRMoN sera. This is basically everything you have to remember, because now if I fill in an article, you're going to see that these endings always work. Let's look at an example in the nominative case. Der Vater, okay, so I have the R ending in the nominative masculine. Die Mutter, I have the E ending in the nominative feminine. Das Kind and die Kinder or die Väter, die Mütter. Okay, let's do another example. If I say mit dem Kind, so I'm in dative, neutral, MoRMoN, so I have the M. So you can see very clearly that I will get the M ending, and that is also what I have in the article here. Now, when we add an adjective to the whole system, it gets a little bit more confusing, you might think, but actually it's not that confusing, because adjectives, when you add them, they can only have two possible endings. And this is either an A ending or an N ending. Okay, so when we combine an adjective with an article, then there is this specific adjective ending, and actually I call it redundant ending because it does not show us the gender. All the other endings that the article is carrying show us the gender of things, so I call them gender endings, whereas the adjective endings, they're pretty unified. You see there are N in all cases except in the gray area that looks a little bit like a gun. In this area you have an A ending. So this is basically just in the nominative singular and in the accusative singular for the feminine and the neutral. Okay, so I have, for example, der gute Vater. Or if we go back to the old example, mit dem guten Kind, I have the gender ending M because of the RESE NESE MoRMoN system, and I have the adjective ending N because I'm outside the gray area. Okay. Let's switch the whole system a little bit and let's put non-definite articles. Now you see something interesting in the nominative because suddenly I have ein guter Vater, ein guter, so the R is not pronounced, it's vocalized, but it is there. And I have ein gutes Kind, okay? So you can see that suddenly the gender endings from the RESE NESE MoRMoN system are carried by the adjective and not by the article. Why? Well, remember this rule. We want to hear the gender ending once and only once. So when we have the definite article can carry the gender ending. So for example, das gute Kind, we do not want to hear the S ending again with the adjective. So something like das gutes Kind is wrong because you have the gender ending twice. But if I say ein, I do not know whether it's masculine or neutral. I don't have a gender ending, so then the adjective carries the gender ending. And I will say ein guter Vater with an R ending, ein gutes Kind with an S ending. Okay, so the gender ending goes to the adjective because we want to hear it once and only once. This even applies if I have only an adjective and no article. So for example, for a noun that I cannot count, like Wasser, I can say gutes Wasser, okay? Or in the dative, I will say mit gutem Wasser. Okay, why? Because simply the gender ending is carried by the adjective. Okay. Now remember, there is one exception to this. It's when we have several adjectives. Okay, when we have several adjectives, then every adjective will carry the same ending. So for example, I would say ein gutes, nettes Kind. Okay, this is really the only situation where that is different. Otherwise, remember in the dative plural, you have an N everywhere. Dative plural is my friend, always has an N at the end. So mit den vielen netten, guten Kindern. You really have an N everywhere. And the same also applies to Genitiv, where you also have endings for the nouns. So you would say wegen des Regens, for example. So in the masculine and the neutral, usually also the noun takes an ending, an S ending. But otherwise, the nouns do not change their endings except for the plural. So they do not get case endings. So how should you work with that? Obviously, when you talk in everyday life and you say something like, yeah, okay, so I have mit and I want to say dem netten Kind. So this is mit is dative. Dative is merne. So that puts me in the M column. So I have mit dem, and then I'm outside the gray area. So it will be an N ending. And of course, this is absolutely unrealistic, right? You're not going to talk like that. You're not going to think for 20 seconds about the correct endings. So honestly, I encourage you to make mistakes at this level. When you speak German, just say out whatever comes into your mind, what you think sounds a little bit right, because otherwise it will always stop you from speaking, and that's not very good. But as your German progresses, you want to get that right. So how do you get it right? By practicing it when you write German. Okay, so when you draft an email or you're working on your homework, then take the time to think about the endings. Because in the long run, what you're doing now by thinking of the system and designing the table and reflecting all this in your mind, it will become absolutely automatic over time. Obviously, and you will just have an intuition that whenever you say mit, you will have these dative endings, and you will automatically know what are the correct dative endings and will just apply them. So there's not an issue about that. I've been telling it again and again. The important thing in the German grammar are the verbs. Everything that has to do with verb ending is something that you should really know very well, even from the beginning, because with this you will have misunderstandings. But with the gender endings and the case endings, you're not going to have misunderstandings. People in Germany, Austria, Switzerland will understand what you want to say, and it doesn't sound very weird, so there is no issue. Also, sometimes you might not know what is the gender of a word, so then you will have a mistake anyway. But in these situations, at least try to be consequent. So at least try to, for example, if you decide that it's probably neutral, then put all the neutral endings and don't mix them up. Don't put like a feminine article and then a neutral ending or something like that, because that sounds obviously a bit weird. Okay, I hope you will find the system helpful. Feel free to comment, feel free to get in touch. Subscribe to our channel and yeah, have fun learning German.